We're now in study session 12, Research Methods in Social Psychology. To understand our social environment better, and to be able to predict and understand the processes of social influence and interaction, we have to go through scientific research. The four methods of scientific research in social psychology are naturalistic observation, survey method, correlational studies, and experiment. These methods shall be the focus of this study session. At the end of this study session, you should be able to utilize naturalistic observation method in social psychology research, utilize survey method in social psychology research, utilize correlational studies method in social psychology research, and utilize experimental method in social psychology research. Naturalistic observation method. The best method of studying human behavior in real-life situation is through naturalistic observation. By this, we mean that an individual is observed in reality as it behaves and will behave naturally in the actual situation without interference. Purposely or otherwise from the observer, experimenter, researcher, or investigator. However, a scientific approach is still needed for the results observed to be generalizable, reliable, and valid. Most important is the operational definition of the behavior of interest. For example, if we're interested in aggressive behavior of children at a playground, then we have to define what is meant by aggressive behavior. Could aggressive behavior be defined as a strike of fellow playmates, frequency of strike by a special individual, intensity of strike, or a shout at fellow playmates, or the loudness of shout, or taking another's toy without permission? By defining the behavior of interest, we are able to conceptualize the issue that is of interest to us. In addition, it will be possible for the study on that particular behavior to be reliable and valid. Another way of ensuring reliability and validity is by direct participation in the mini society of interest, that is, through participant observation method. Here, the researcher has first-hand experience of what he or she is interested in and is able to avoid suspicion with the advantage of using mechanical aids such as video recorders, hidden cameras, one-way mirrors, and many more. Another form of the observation method which can be subsumed under naturalistic observation is the archival method of study. This entails the use of national archives, libraries, museums, and other related institutions, and the saving of relevant information out of the files. There are disadvantages though, for example, falsification of facts by the initial recorders, failure to update information, and subjectivity. It should be noted, however, that there are some limitations in participant observation method. These include the following. 1. Limitations imposed by the researchers taking a role. The researcher, by virtue of the very fact that he plays a role in the group, may impose certain restrictions upon his own understanding of the situation. once the observer becomes a full-fledged member of the group. Familiarity may lead him to take certain things for granted. He may lose his sensitivity to the possibility of latent patterns and may adopt the attitudes and stereotypes of his informants, or at times he may jump to conclusions. 2. How to avoid or manage limitations. The personality of the researcher, his public identity, his habits, value, and what some people call native intelligence is his greatest asset. He can, for example, govern to a certain extent the control effect and a biased viewpoint effect by the way he establishes his presence. He may openly let his subjects know that they are being studied or may not reveal his real identity, assuming some plausible role such as taking a job. Finally, participants' observational method might lead to death. For example, when members of the secret society he is studying get to know about his activity. Survey method. This involves construction of questionnaires and written skills to measure or study issues that are particularly difficult to study by observation, such as attitudes, beliefs, opinions, and views. The questionnaire or survey method involves asking people predetermined questions, which are often derived from literature and theoretical reviews on the subject matter of interest. Respondents' responses can be guided on their formats, such as having the Likert-type responses strongly agree, undecided, disagree, or strongly disagree, or left open to be coded later on by the researcher. The important thing is that the questionnaire is valid if it measures what it purports to measure or intended to measure, while it is reliable if it is reproducible, dependable, and consistent in its measurement. To make a questionnaire valuable, we must ensure that we take a random sample of target population. We must ensure that once the sample has been selected, those chosen must be asked to participate, and the items in the questionnaire are phrased in simple and understandable language that will make the respondents willing to respond to them. Sometimes, questionnaires are in form of tests, skill, and/or inventories. By means of tests, large quantities of data can be obtained from people in factories or hospitals or schools, and so on. Correlation method. This method is adopted when the researcher is interested in knowing the extent to which two or more variables are related. If they are suspended to have a relationship, then the correlational method is employed. The variables are sometimes present in the individuals. For example, if it is suspected that the cooler an environment is, the more the tendency to smoke cigarettes, what the researcher does is find two varying conditions in terms of temperature and subject people who smoke to these conditions. The researcher then compares the number of cigarette sticks smoked by individuals in the two groups. The relationship is analyzed using a statistical test of T independent groups. Another correlational method is comparing the heights of basketball players against ability to play if it is suggested that the two variables have relationship. To do this, we have to determine which is the dependent variable and which is the independent variable. The dependent variable is the one on which measure is taken, in this case, ability to play. The independent variable is the one which is believed to have influence on the dependent variable, in this case, height. All the researcher needs to do is categorize ability into good or bad and compare the heights of players who fall under each category using Pearson moment correlation statistical test. That is, what will result is a ratio. If a ratio of 0.8 is gotten from the analysis, then it can be concluded that a high relationship exists between the height of people and the ability to play basketball. This is a positive correlation. We can also get a negative correlation in that if the variable increases, the other will decrease. We can also get a zero correlation when there is no relationship or a perfect relationship if change of about 5% in one variable brings about a change of about 5% in another variable. There are disadvantages in this method. For example, we cannot establish a causal relationship between the variables. That is, we cannot say a variable will cause or causes a change in another. This is a great limitation of this method. Experimental method. This technique is the one that best enables us to establish a cause and effect relationship where we can actually determine whether a variable can cause a change in another variable and sometimes by how much. In conducting experiments, social psychologists follow the procedures that are standard practice in all experimental sources. That is, he sets up an experiment under carefully controlled conditions to isolate only the variable of interest. The experiments can be either field or laboratory experiments. In a field experiment, the researcher has the advantage of manipulating the independent variables and observing their effect on variables of interest in the field or natural setting. In this field of experiment, Balogun manipulated the effects of bargaining strategy in mode of dressing on bargaining outcomes in open market. He created two types of bargaining strategies, tough and soft, and two types of dressing mode, formal and informal, and asked people to dress in either, from using either of the strategies in an attempt to buy something from the open market. The intention was to see which combination will elicit better bargaining outcomes in terms of financial gains or behavioral responses from sellers. The added advantage of this method is that in social psychological students, we can make things happen by introducing our own variables of interest. Another experimental method is the use of laboratory experiments. Here, a near-perfect real situation is stimulated in a room, while other sources have been removed from the stimulated conditions in order not to interfere with behaviors of interest. The researcher then brings in people or subjects into the stimulated conditions, manipulating the independent variable. For example, if a researcher is interested in the effect of noise on concentration or memory span, what he would do is to create a situation where there will be noise and where there will be no noise or vary the degree of noise level in randomly assigned subjects who have been matched on other factors like sex, age, intelligence into the different noise groups. He will then present them with the task of listening to a list of words to memorize and recall later. With the use of appropriate statistical method, the researcher will be able to tell whether or not noise has effect on ability to recall. This kind of research or method is quite useful in Nigeria today, where there is noise pollution from commercial motor drivers, churches and mosques, record vendors, and so on. At present, however, emphasis is shifting to evaluative research. In this research method, researchers are interested in knowing the degree to which an intervention is successful or not in addressing the issue at stake. For example, how has Nigerian behavior in respect of cleanliness changed as a result of monthly environmental exercises? How has Nigerian behavior changed in respect of childbearing as a result of the introduction of family planning methods? And what's changed in respect of treating naira notes has resulted from government's war against such habits? And has the federal government of Nigeria been able to eliminate tribalism and ethnocentrism in Nigeria as a result of the compulsory national service for graduates of our universities and other allied institutions? These are examples of questions that evaluative research sets out to tackle. Its method can be said to be eclectic in that all the already mentioned approaches to scientific study may be employed by the researcher. However, as warned earlier, the method mentioned here are not exhaustive and exclusive of other methods that may be employed from time to time by researchers in social psychology. In fact, a number of variations may be brought in by the researcher without any prejudice. As observed by Lindgren, 1973, fooling around with research techniques is probably much more common in an attempt to solve any given social behavior. Study session summary. In this study session, we noted that our social environment can be better understood, and we can be able to predict behavior through scientific research. The four methods of scientific research in social psychology are consequently explored. The methods are naturalistic observation, survey method, correlational studies, and experimental method. We have now come to the end of study session 12 and to the end of the course PSY206 Social Psychology. Thank you for listening.